Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to start with a fresh topic, psychoanalytic criticism. Well, I believe you're all aware of what psychoanalysis is. It's mainly connected with mental disorders, especially techniques or methods practiced by psychiatrists to cure a person of mental illnesses, okay, mental disorders. So these techniques, when applied to analysis of literary work, would be psychoanalytic criticism. Alright? So how is psychoanalysis relevant for literary criticism? The techniques used in psychoanalysis, there is a therapy used to cure or understand human psyche. Those techniques applied to literary work, in the analysis of literary work, would be called psychoanalytic criticism. So in this chapter we'd be concerned mainly with two psychoanalysts, Sigmund Freud and Jacques Lacan. All right. So as far as Freud is concerned, he seems to have laid the foundation for the modern psychoanalysis. All right. So he understood mind as sort of like the conscious and the unconscious part. Of course, he was not the first one to propose this theory. There have been plenty of people who used various terms, different terms, to denote the unconscious part of human mind. But basically, as far as in very simple terms, you can say that the conscious part of our mind is the part that we are aware of, what it thinks. It's sort of in control. The unconscious part is where all the repressed emotions seem to stay, okay, and we seem to have very little control over it. You could call it the instinctive part of human mind, which sort of lays dormant most of the time, but our actions are sort of directed by the emotions or thoughts that are hidden in this unconscious part of our human mind. All right. So basically, they're concerned with the three main aspects: the mind, the instinct, and the sexuality of a person. All right. So our conscious and unconscious thoughts are sort of determined by these three factors. So whatever we think, whatever we do, it is all sort of mixed with these three things. Okay. So he variously named it later on as the we'll go to that later, ego, superego, innate, and all that. We'll talk about it later. But first of all, so the idea is that when you allow a person to speak freely, a person with a mental disorder, when you allow that person to speak freely, all the repressed emotions find some outlet, or else they manifest themselves in some sort of disorder, mental disorder. Now, some of the Freud's major ideas we'll look into, so that we can apply to it later on. First of all, would be repression. Yeah. Repression, which is the forgetting or ignoring of unresolved conflicts. Please bear this in mind. One of the ideas is proposed by Freud is of repression. So all of Freud's work depends upon the notion of unconscious. So which this part of the mind is beyond the consciousness, but still has strong influence upon our actions. So our those conflicts, that is like the conflicts that are not resolved, we may believe for the moment that we are over it. We may believe that for the moment that we do not really desire something anymore, just because they cannot be fulfilled. We may seem to have sort of recovered from a traumatic experience, but then no one can completely come out of these experiences completely, right? They stay hidden in some part of our memory, in some part of our mind, and we tend to sort of act in certain ways because of the existence of these repressed emotions, as in things that are not forgotten, but at the same time we try to pretend we try to believe that it does not exist anymore. Okay. So this is what he calls repression. Okay. Repression is the forgetting or ignoring of unresolved conflicts, unadmitted desires, or traumatic past events. Alright, so that they are forced out of conscious awareness and into the realm of the unconscious. So again, another idea is that of sublimation. Sublimation is where a person has this some repressed material in him or her, which is not really that admirable or acceptable even. Okay, you have some emotion in you, some thought of some feeling which is not acceptable in the society, or probably it's not agreeable enough, but at the same time it is sort of promoted, this repressed material, when it is promoted to something grand, or is disguised as something noble, it is called sublimation. Okay, so the idea may be of very least importance, or may not even be, or kind of disagreeable, but it is made to look really good and great, or it is promoted to, it manifests itself in a certain way, so that it is made to look really grand, it's made to look almost noble. Right, so this Freud calls sublimation. For instance, sexual urges may be given sublimated expression in the form of intense religious experiences or longings. There may be certain examples, we'll look into it in our live class, inshallah. So later in his career, Freud suggested a 3-part rather than a 2-part model of the psyche. 2-part model of the psyche is proposed by Freud is the part wherein there is the mind is divided into the conscious and the unconscious part. Now later on, Freud suggested this 3-part model, where you have the ego, superego, and id. Now ego would be your consciousness as in what you are actually aware of. The superego would be the conscience, as in that which tells you or gives you the understanding between right and wrong. And the third would be the id, that is the unconscious. Okay, the unconscious, where things are hidden, at the same time it still has a great deal of control over you. Alright, so many of Freud's ideas concern its aspects of sexuality. Infantile sexuality, for instance, is the notion that sexuality begins not at puberty with physical maturing, but in infancy. So you have all the other some 5 stages of sexuality as proposed by Freud, and when these stages are not are hindered at some point, or the growth of a person during these stages, during the developmental stages of these five stages of sexuality is hindered somehow, a person tends to find himself in a sort of repressed state, and that manifests itself in some kind of disorder, right? So connected with this is the idea of Oedipus complex. You ought to be familiar with that as well, where the male infant conceives the desire to eliminate the father and become the sexual partner of the mother. And it's like, I believe you're all familiar with Oedipus complex, or the story of Oedipus Rex, from which the name is derived, right? So many forms of intergenerational conflict are seen by Freudians as having Oedipal overtones, such as professional rivalries, often viewed in Freudian terms as reproducing the competition between siblings for parental favor. Now, another key idea is that of the libido, which is the energy drive associated with sexual desire. In classic Freudian theory, it has 3 stages of focus: the oral, the anal, and the phallic. So the libido in the individual is part of a more generalized drive, which the later Freud called eros and thanatos. Now, eros would be the life instinct, whereas the thanatos would be the death instinct. All right, a controversial notion. So we all seem to harbor these both instincts, and they sort of are balanced out most of the time. Okay, any imbalance in it will, of course, tend to get you in depression. Then several key terms concern what might be called psychic processes, such as transference. So these are psychic processes, please remember. Transference, then projection and defense mechanism, Freudian slip, and screen memory. Okay, so to begin with, transference. Let me just mark it out for you. Transference is something where a patient under analysis redirects the emotions recalled in analysis towards the psychoanalyst. So you may be angry with something or with someone or about something, but what you do is you tend to, instead of taking out on one person, you direct it towards the psychoanalyst. So the antagonism or resentment felt towards a parental figure in the past might be reactivated but directed against the analyst. So for instance, if you have been angry with probably a parental figure at some point of time in your early life, not the usual anger we feel. Okay, every child has this some form of anger towards one of the parents. It's quite natural. I mean, you love your parents, you also sometimes are angry towards them because they don't understand you fully well. But we are talking about the abnormal anger. Abnormal anger as in extreme anger. So you may have a certain anger towards your parent at some point, but you cannot take it out on that parental figure. So later on, at some point, you direct it towards your own child or your own spouse, or maybe someone weaker than you. So this is what Freud calls transference. So it is a psychic process. This quite happens quite often. Okay. Now another mechanism is that of projection. Projection, it would be where you yourself may have some negative negative aspect. Okay, but we refuse to accept it as part of ourselves, but we try to perceive it or attribute in another. So there might be, you may find plenty of people who may have a certain vice in them, or something that is generally hated. Okay, but then they refuse to agree that they themselves do it. They have this inherent negativity inside them. Instead, what they do is they try to find the same vice everywhere and project it. This is called projection. So projecting one's own negativity, one's own negative aspect, and trying to find it somewhere else, trying to perceive it in other sources, right? And feeling better about themselves. I mean, this way what happens, they try to feel better about themselves somehow. Okay, they try to deny that they are like that at all. So for instance, someone is greedy. Simple example, say for instance, A is greedy, very very greedy, but at the same time this person would try to look at everyone as greedy. Okay, and if confronted as in, if someone asks directly, why are you so greedy, they will completely refuse and deny the existence of such a feeling in themselves. Okay, this is what is projection. Okay, at least a form of projection. So it is like they try to disown this feeling. Now both these might be seen as defense mechanisms. There is a psychic procedure for avoiding painful admission or recognition. So both in the case of transference and in projection. In transference, you try to avoid the main point, that you are angry with a particular person you're not supposed to be angry with, but at the same time you cannot help but be angry, or have a certain it's not merely about being angry. It's you could put in any kind of emotion for that matter. You have a certain attraction for a person that is not healthy for you. Okay, so you try to transfer it to someone else. Or you may have a certain emotion towards any a person, you try to transfer it to someone else. That is what transference is about. Again, the projection is also a kind of defense mechanism, where you try to project your own emotions or your own some aspect of yours in, and try to see it in different people, other people. So these two are all defense mechanism. Again, another such defense mechanism is screen memory. Screen memory is where you try to, this is like a sort of trivial or inconsequential memory, whose function is to obliterate a more significant one. Say for instance, you undergo some sort of pain, God forbid, you undergo some deep trauma. Now during that period, during the traumatic period, you you try to sort of remember one insignificant detail, probably the presence of one small article of clothing, or maybe one splash of color somewhere, or maybe one small action someone did. That sort of is it replaces or tries to block out or obliterate the main the main event that has caused you the trauma. that that kind of event would be called screen memory. I mean, that kind of memory would be called screen memory. So these are all, please remember, defense mechanisms. Okay, so well known example of these mechanisms is the Freudian slip. Freudian slip, often we all come across this kind of slips knowingly. Oh, no, it's done quite unconsciously done. We may be going off to say something and we end up saying something else. We make a slip. So Freud calls this Freudian slip parapraxis. Okay, parapraxis, whereby a repressed material in the unconscious finds an outlet through such slips. Through such slips, as in through everyday phenomena as slips of the tongue, slips of the pen, or unintended actions. You may not have intended it. It may have so the final example of important Freudian terminology is the dream work. Dream work, the process by which real events or desires are transformed into dream images. Now, sometimes it works both ways. The real event may be termed or like in Freud's interpretation of dreams. Yeah, I believe that's the title of the book, I believe. You may find that whatever we dream, it has its basis on some real life event. So sometimes there is a sense of displacement. There is the characters featuring in our dreams may be displaced by other characters. I mean, that were not in the real event, the real event that took place. And it may show itself, it may manifest itself in different ways as in the action may reflect upon, or sometimes it is condensed. Many events may be condensed to one single dream, or one dream may have certain overtones of repressed emotions in real life. Okay, so they may manifest themselves in different ways. Okay, so first of all, in dream work, so displacement would be one of the dream works. Okay, dream works here would imply where a certain person or event is represented by another, which is in some way linked or associated. There must be some kind of association between what the actual event that took place was, and what the dream event is. Okay, so there is some kind of association, but then there may be some kind of displacement, some kind of change. So because of a similar sounding word, perhaps because of a similar sounding word, or by some form of symbolic substitution. Okay, then condensation, another idea is that of, first of all, dream work, displacement, condensation. Okay, now condensation is a kind of dream work where a number of people, events, meanings are combined and represented by a single image in the dream. So it may so for instance, one dream may contain a series of events and a multitude of people in one brief image. Okay, so of course it may be a very normal dream without any a person without any mental disorders. Of course, we all do have certain repressed ideas, repressed figures. We're not always outspoken, right? We tend to hide so much. Our brain, our mouth filters everything we say, and we ourselves defend ourselves. The mind is capable of defending itself from harming itself, right? With engaging in too much of anxiety, too many fears is abnormal. It's unhealthy for us, right? So our mind tends to repress these kind of emotions, any kind of negative emotion, fear, anxiety, worry, um, you know all of these emotions are repressed most of the time. So what happens, they at some point they find a way out. And how do they find their way out? In some sort of mental disorder, or probably in simple dreams. Okay, so in dream work, please, you may want to remember displacement and condensation. Now, thus, characters, motivation, and events are presented in dreams in a very literary way, involving the translation by the dream work of abstract ideas or feelings into concrete images. So, any abstract idea, for instance, an engagement isn't like not the engagement, marital engagement. I'm talking about how you engage with a certain person. Probably you feel uneasy about a certain person. Okay, the conscious mind may not be sure of why you feel uneasy about that person, why someone makes you feel awkward, right? But then in the dream, this awkwardness, this abstract notion of unease may take a concrete form. Okay, you may actually realize why you feel uneasy towards that person, if that is, if the dream is vivid enough for you to remember after you have dreamt. Okay, so you see, it is quite literary, isn't it? It's more explainable, definable. Now, dreams, just like literature, do not usually make explicit statements. Both tend to communicate obliquely or indirectly, avoiding direct or open statement, representing meanings through concrete embodiments of time, place, or person. So you cannot wholly rely on it, but then, hypothetically speaking, they do work well to understand how our mind works to some extent. So, how Freudian interpretation works, to understand how Freudian interpretation works, you need to know that Freud was mainly concerned with the idea that thought is connected with one's sexuality. Okay, so in dream, whatever objects you find, or not, whatever objects you see in dream, they may have sexual connotation according to Freud. But then sometimes, as Freud says, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. You don't have to think too much about it, right? So you have to be cautious most of the time, but in the case of, at the risk of overstretching your imagination, because see, it is all hypothetical mostly. Okay, so there is this one dream which is there's a very popular interpretation of a dream of a Roman soldier. Okay, so see, since Freud believes that it's a dream is an escape hatch or a safety valve through which repressed desires, fears, or memories seek an outlet into the conscious mind, it is necessary for us to remember that they are sort of conditioned by the conscious mind. So a dream that represents certain objects, certain people, certain event need not be literally taken and Freudian terminology applied to indiscriminately. Okay, so it's necessary that you understand that it has been filtered or foolproofed by our conscious mind. So here, the Roman soldier might be connected with the real subject of the dream by a chain of association. Let's say that the dreamer is a young adult, still under the thumb of an authoritarian father, but wanting to break away from his influence and experience adult life to the full. The Roman soldier might represent the father by a process of association. The father is associated with the ideas of strictness, authority, and power in the domestic sphere. The Roman soldier is linked to the same things in the political sphere. So the one is substituted for the other. So the soldier in the dream is a symbolic representation of the father. See, simply put, the people of our generation might actually see Mogambo as their father if the father is too authoritarian, as if as if a father who is not allowing you to live your life completely to the fullest extent, you may view him as a villain you see in a movie, right? That's quite possible. Not exactly villain, someone very authoritarian. Okay, so but several meanings might be condensed into the simple. Suppose a dreamer is tempted to rebel against the father by entering into a sexual liaison of which the father would certainly disapprove. The Roman soldier might also represent this person, the envisaged lover. Perhaps the cliched phrase Latin lover might have prompted this. Thus, both the feared father and the desired lover are condensed into the single dream figure of the Roman soldier. So you see, it could take various forms. Any object of that is a, an object from a dream can be interpreted in several ways, and various defense mechanisms can be at work here. Dream work could be at work here. So, so you cannot completely justify one theory against another. Okay, so the purpose of devices like displacement and condensation is twofold. Firstly, as we said, they disguise the repressed fears and wishes contained in the dream so that they can get past the censor, which normally prevents their surfacing into the conscious mind. Secondly, they fashion this material into something which can be represented in a dream. Okay, first of all the fears that are repressed, that do not find free outlet, you cannot go straight ahead. I mean, you cannot tell your father, especially if it's an authoritarian father, you cannot go and tell it to his face that he is authoritarian, that he's very strict, that he's not letting you live your life, right? Hence, all these anxious feelings, anxious thoughts, these fearful thoughts are repressed in your memory. Okay, so that's one thing. Okay, and so this is sort of an outlet. These these feelings find outlet in your dream. Now the second idea is that they fashion this material into something which can be represented in a dream. So two things are happening simultaneously here.